So the 2025 NBA trade deadline is less than 10 days away. And for today's video, I want to look back at last year's trade deadline in 2024 and grade those deals how they look 1 year later. Because at the time, a lot of these moves are for teams to go all in during that season in 2024 and try to make a playoff push. Some worked out, some did not. So today we're going to use the power of hindsight and I'm going to put a letter grade on these deals. So we're going to grade most of the notable ones today. And the first one I want to talk about happened on February 8th last year. The Dallas Mavericks added PJ Washington from the Charlotte Hornets. The Mavericks received PJ Washington, a 2024 second round pick, a 2028 second round pick, and the Charlotte Hornets received Grant Williams, Seth Curry, and a 2027 first round pick. So to start things off, I want to give the Dallas Mavericks an A+ in this deal. What a phenomenal add at last year's trade deadline. We know that the Dallas Mavericks won the Western Conference. They went to the NBA Finals, and I don't know if they're there without PJ Washington and how he shot in round number 2 against the OKC Thunder. He did struggle with his efficiency in the conference finals and in the NBA finals, but against OKC in round number 2, in those 6 games, he averaged 17.5 points, 8 rebounds, and shot 47% from the field and 47% from 3. And PJ Washington has been very good for the Dallas Mavericks in year number 2. After getting traded over, he has turned into a really good on-ball defender over in Dallas, and it feels like he's just been bought in a lot more now that he's in a winning environment and no longer on a rebuilding team in Charlotte. He's still just 26 years old. He's putting up 14 points and 8 rebounds this year. He's been phenomenal since Derek Lively went down, and Daniel Gafford's been banged up at times as well. And PJ Washington, like I said, great defender, phenomenal rebounder, and he's shooting 36% from 3. $15 million this year he's making, and then just $14 million next year. They will need to re-sign him at the end of the 2026 season, but he has been playing so much better than what his contract is worth. And honestly, giving up a first-round pick in 2027 and some matching salary, I think Dallas did a great job. As for Charlotte's side of things, I'm going to give them a B. I don't think PJ Washington was ever going to turn out this good on this version of the Charlotte Hornets that we saw last year and this year. And I think Grant Williams was a solid pickup for them. He was a nice veteran leader in that locker room before he did suffer a season-ending injury this year, but is going to be under contract for the next couple of years. It was obviously a cool homecoming for Seth Curry in Charlotte, and we'll see what that first-round pick ends up being down the line, but that pick doesn't have any protections on it, so I do think Charlotte did a fine job. I'm giving them a B here. It just hurts a little bit that PJ Washington is playing so much better in Dallas than he ever was in Charlotte. Next up, I want to talk about a trade between the New York Knicks and the Detroit Pistons, and as a Knicks fan on my live stream, I was pretty happy when this deal went down, but I don't know if it's aged that well for them in hindsight. This deal sent Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic from the Detroit Pistons to the New York Knicks, and Detroit got Evan Fournier, Malachi Flynn, Quentin Grimes, Ryan Arcidiacono, 2 future second-round picks, and some cash considerations. We'll start off with the New York Knicks. I'm actually going to give them a C- in this deal. I don't think they really did all that well trying to add some veteran scorers here at the deadline. Bojan played 29 games for the Knicks in that 2024 regular season. He shot 43% from the field and 37% from 3, and obviously is a top option in Detroit, going from there to not a top 5 option in New York. His points per game dropped from 20 to 10 a night, and he was supposed to be this nice veteran scorer off the bench throughout the playoffs, and he only played 4 playoff games for the Knicks, suffering a playoff-ending injury during that first-round series against the Philadelphia 76ers, where he averaged 6 points, shot 29% from the field in around 12.5 minutes. And while Alec Burks gave the Knicks some moments as well, he really wasn't that impactful of a player, and he was also a free agent at the end of the year. He signed with the Miami Heat, and I'm giving the Knicks a C- because I think Quentin Grimes could obviously be a big part on the Knicks right now, and they could have just picked up Evan Fournier's team option, which was a similar salary amount to Bojan Bogdanovic's, and they could have still made that Mikal Bridges trade. As for Detroit, I'm going to give this a B. They got a lot of nothing in this deal, rotational player-wise. Outside of that 50-point performance Malachi Flynn had, him, Evan Fournier, and Ryan Arcidiacono pretty much did nothing for Detroit last year and obviously for their future. I think Quentin Grimes would have been a really fun piece around Cade Cunningham, and I know he didn't play all that well during the second half of last year's season in Detroit after this deal was made, but I think they gave up on him too soon to bring a veteran in like Tim Hardaway Jr. I know they got some second-round draft capital in that deal, but I think I would have still taken a chance on Quentin Grimes going into the last year of his rookie contract. But we're going to use hindsight here, and them just getting Quentin Grimes for Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks is a good deal, so I'm giving it a B for Detroit. Next up, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and this deal was made in the middle of January, but it was still, I think, part of the 2024 trade deadline era, and that is going to be the one that sent Pascal Siakam from the Toronto Raptors, who was going to be a free agent at the end of the year, to the Indiana Pacers in exchange for Bruce Brown, Kyron Lewis, Jordan Nwora, a 2024 first-round pick that was traded in a later deal that we'll talk about, and another first-round pick that was from the Indiana Pacers that ended up being Jacoby Walter. And then there's also going to be a 2026 first-round pick that's going to go to Toronto as well in this deal, as Indiana obviously got Pascal Siakam. So for the Toronto Raptors, I'm actually going to give this a C. I feel like they didn't do a great job getting a big return in exchange for Pascal Siakam, and obviously using one of those first-round picks they got in this deal to make a trade that I hinted to that we'll talk about in a little bit helps us grade out a little bit. But if they don't really get anything for Bruce Brown, because I think he's lost a decent amount of value since getting traded here, they didn't get Andrew Nemhard or Aaron Nesmith or Isaiah Jackson in this deal. I know those were rumored to be on the table, and Kyron Lewis and Jordan Nwora basically didn't really do anything for Toronto either, and Pascal Siakam was one of their best players over the last 10 years, and I think they could have gotten better offers if they moved him in the offseason prior to the 2024 deadline. So I think Masai Ujiri kind of whiffed on the Pascal Siakam deal. As for the Indiana Pacers, I'm going to give this an A. I think they added a great co-star to Tyrese Haliburton for not as much as Pascal Siakam should have gone for. Siakam isn't a perfect player by any means, but you basically traded 3 players that really didn't have a big future on your team. You traded a late first-round pick and a pick that ended up being Jacoby Walter for Pascal Siakam, who last year for the Pacers, throughout 41 regular season games, averaged 21 points and 8 rebounds. He shot 55% from the field and 38% from 3, and he was their most reliable scorer in the playoffs for a team that ended up making it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They were able to ink a long-term extension for Pascal Siakam in the offseason, and he's still been really good for them this year. He is 30 years old. I'm not sure how he's going to age in the final years of this contract, but he's still been great here in 2025, shooting 52% from the field, 41% from 3, and is averaging 20 points and 7.5 rebounds. And once again, is just very consistent on the offensive end for Indiana. I think they did a very good job here. So I'll just talk about that trade that I just hinted to about, and this is where I think Masai Ujiri did very well last year at the deadline. This trade that sent Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji from the Utah Jazz to the Toronto Raptors in exchange for that late first-round pick that went from Indiana via OKC to Toronto. That player ended up being Isaiah Collier. Otto Porter Jr. and Kyron Lewis Jr. ended up going to Utah. And I'm going to give Toronto an A here because I think they really found something in Ochai Agbaji from the Utah Jazz, because he was that 14th overall pick in that 2022 draft. He was included in the Donovan Mitchell trade that sent him from Cleveland to Utah before ever playing a game in the NBA. And he just didn't really work out in the first year and a half in Utah and definitely needed a change of scenery. And he has been fantastic for the Toronto Raptors since they acquired him. There were some struggles last year, but this year he's really breaking out. Throughout 39 games, he's shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3 on 4 3-point attempts a night. He's averaging 10.5 points, 4 rebounds, and has provided the Toronto Raptors valuable defense on the perimeter. And he's just making $4.3 million this year and $6.3 million next year under this team option. And while guys are getting expensive on this team like RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and Scotty Barnes, Agbaji is going to be a really good cheap rotational player for them still for the next year and a half. And I thought they got good value on Kelly Olynyk, who I think they're going to be able to move this year at the deadline. He's shooting 48% from 3, averaging 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists. He is 33 years old and is making $12 million this year and $13 million next year. But like I said, I think you can get some second-round picks back to the Toronto Raptors, which could make this trade look even better for them. As for Utah, I like this trade when it happened a lot more for them, but I'm definitely going to give them a lower grade than Toronto. I'm going to give them a B- in this deal just because they didn't get this version of Ochai Agbaji, who I think could be a very good contributing piece to this Jazz team right now. But like I said, probably just needed a change of scenery. They ended up getting the 29th overall pick in this draft for Olynyk and Agbaji, and they took Isaiah Collier. And if you would have told me Isaiah Collier was going to be there at 29 when this trade happened, I would have been like, oh my God, what happened? This is a steal of a lifetime. And Collier did go later than expected. There have been reasons why this year he has been inefficient at scoring at the rim, not taking the best shots in the world, but there have been some good moments at times for Collier as a playmaker in the half court. And I do think he still has potential in this league. So that's why they're getting a B- here rather than something in the C's or D's. Next up, we're going to talk about a trade that happened the same day of the Pascal Siakam deal, the trade that sent Terry Rozier from the Charlotte Hornets to the Miami Heat in exchange for Kyle Lowry's matching salary and a 2027 lottery protected pick. And if that pick is in the lottery, Charlotte's going to get Miami's unprotected pick in 2028. I think this is a home run trade for the Charlotte Hornets. I'm giving it an A+. I really believe that Charlotte sold perfectly high on Terry Rozier, and they traded him at the right time because he was having a very good year and a very good start to the 2024 season. Throughout 30 games for Charlotte, was averaging 23 points, 6.5 assists, 4 rebounds a night on 45% shooting from the field, 36% shooting from 3 on 7.5 attempts, and 84% from the line. He did have a couple years left on his contract, but they basically traded away Rozier at his highest value. They got a first-round pick down the line. Who knows where Miami is going to be with this whole Jimmy Butler saga and how they're going to look in 2027 or 2028. This also allowed more touches for some of the younger guys and another guard that they got back in a deal that we'll talk about in a little bit. I think this was a great trade for Charlotte, and I think they deserve props for this one. As for Miami, I got to give this a D. There's a reason why Pat Riley didn't want to make a trade in the offseason or at the deadline later after this deal, because he thought that their big acquisition to help out Jimmy Butler to try to win a ring as he gets older is to acquire Terry Rozier, who has been nothing short of underwhelming since getting traded to the Miami Heat. I just talked about how good his numbers were in the first 30 games last year for Charlotte, and then in a 31 game sample size for the Miami Heat after that deal, the points shot from 23 to 16, the field goal percentage dropped from 46% to 42%, the three-point shot did go up from 35% to 37%, but this year has been a disaster for Terry Rozier, having one of the worst years of his career, averaging 12 points, shooting 40% from the field, 29% from 3, has not been playing good defense. I think makes 1 or 2 just head-scratching plays every single night. He has had a few injuries since this trade went down, and maybe that's affecting Scary Terry's play, but from his production and what Miami gave up and the fact that they have to pay him $24.9 million this year and $26.6 million next year, I think D might be a little bit generous for this deal using hindsight. Charlotte was one of the more active teams at the 2024 deadline. I alluded to this trade a little bit ago in that Rozier trade, and that was the deal that sent Gordon Hayward from the Charlotte Hornets to the OKC Thunder in exchange for Vasilije Micic, Trey Mann, Davis Bertans, a 2024 second-round pick that ended up being KJ Simpson, and a 2025 second-round pick as well. For Charlotte, I'm giving them another A. I think they did really good in this trade, just sending off Gordon Hayward an expiring contract and getting Trey Mann, who wasn't getting a ton of playing time in OKC. Trey Mann is still 23 years old. This year, he has been dealing with some injuries. Last year, though, in 28 games after this deal for Charlotte, he was averaging 12 points, shooting 45% from the field, 36% from 3, averaging 4.5 rebounds and 5 assists. And this year, while he has been dealing with injuries, like I said, most notably a back injury, he's averaging 14 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds a night, shooting 44% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line across 13 games. He is going to be a restricted free agent at the end of the year, but I think he's a perfect six-man for this team going forward, having this nice microwave scorer off the bench, and at all costs of them was Gordon Hayward. So yeah, for OKC, this is an F. Sam Presti came out and said, I don't even know why I did this trade, and it's definitely one of the more head-scratching moves he has made in the last few years, because obviously he's looked at as one of, if not the best GM in all of basketball. Gordon Hayward was not a good playmaker for this team off the bench. He played 26 games for the Thunder after this deal. His numbers were fine efficiency-wise, but just didn't really make that much of an impact on either end of the floor, and he ended up retiring at the end of the year. I think Charlotte did fairly well at this deadline, but the team that did a little bit better has to be the Dallas Mavericks. We already talked about how well they did in the PJ Washington trade. Well, yeah, they did just as good in the Daniel Gafford trade that sent Daniel Gafford to Dallas in exchange for Rashawn Holmes to match the salary and a 2024 first-round pick that ended up basically being Keyshawn George. For Dallas, it's another A+. They really did well at the 2024 deadline. Gafford has been such a big addition for this team. Last year in 29 games, he was a great starting center for the Mavericks. 11 points, 7 rebounds, almost 2 blocks a night, shot 78% from the field, and was still such an impactful player for them during their Western Conference Championship run. And this year, Gafford has also been so important to the Mavericks because of all the Derek Lively injuries. Throughout 44 games this year, in only 21 minutes per game, Gafford is averaging 12 points, 6.5 rebounds, 1.6 blocks, shooting 69% from the field, and has had really good performances since Derek Lively went down, where he's now playing over 30 minutes a night, because he's used to pretty much splitting up his minutes with Lively at the center position. They don't play both of them at the same time, so he's not playing more than like 24-ish minutes a night. Now he's playing 30 plus and is such an impactful center, and like PJ Washington, is on a great contract as well, where he's making just $13 million this year and $14 million next year. As for Washington, I'm going to give them a C+ here. I do think they could have done a little bit better in this trade, because Daniel Gafford was showing a lot of promise in Washington, and obviously he is selling a ton over in Dallas, and they didn't get really any good players back because Rashawn Holmes was mainly just salary filler. As for Keyshawn George, who is showing some potential, I do think they could have gotten maybe Keyshawn George and another young player back in this trade. So I do like this a little bit less for Washington than I do for Dallas, because yeah, Washington could use another center like Daniel Gafford right now. Second and last trade I want to talk about is a 3-teamer. The Suns got Royce O'Neal from the Brooklyn Nets and David Roddy from the Memphis Grizzlies. Memphis received a 2026 first-round pick swap from the Suns, Chimezie Metu and Yuta Watanabe, and the Brooklyn Nets received Keita Bates-Diop, Jordan Goodwin, both from the Phoenix Suns, and 3 future second-round picks from Phoenix. So I think Memphis deserves an A just to help orchestrate this deal. Just basically getting a 2026 first-round pick swap from the Phoenix Suns. Who knows where they're going to be next year with Kevin Durant getting up there in age? Are they going to make an all-in move this year? And they were already bottoming out last year because of all the injuries Memphis had in that 2024 season. So I think Zach Kleiman, the GM, president of basketball operations, did a great job just orchestrating himself into this deal, help facilitate it financially, and get a first-round pick swap out of it for basically David Roddy. I'm going to give Phoenix a B- in this deal because they already made the Bradley Beal trade and the Kevin Durant trade, the Yusuf Nurkic trade, so they really couldn't do a lot. And they had to go after a player like Royce O'Neal, who was going to be a free agent at the end of the 2024 season. They gave him a 4-year deal worth $40+ million because they couldn't afford for him to leave because he's playing a decent amount of minutes every single night for Phoenix. And while he has been a good player for them, especially as a 3-and-D piece where he shot 37% from 3 across 30 games last year, and he's shooting 40% from 3 across 38 games this year, and he's a good player for them, it's just trading away all that draft capital for Royce O'Neal is definitely very risky in the long term. And then for Brooklyn, I'm just going to give them a C+. I don't know why or how they couldn't get that first round pick swap in this deal and it had to go to Memphis, but I do think they fumbled that a little bit. But you know what? Getting 3 future second round picks is pretty good value for Royce O'Neal, who's probably going to leave you in the offseason anyway. And the last trade that I want to talk about is just a reason to talk about the New York Knicks. I wanted to get this trade in here. It went down on December 30th, so not technically a trade deadline deal, but was part of that era. And that sent OG Anunoby from Toronto to the New York Knicks, along with Malachi Flynn and Precious Achiuwa in exchange for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a 2024 second round pick that ended up being Jonathan Mogbo. And I wanted to be a little bit more positive at the end of the video because I do think this is a win-win trade for both parties involved, as the Knicks have a 50-19 record with OG Anunoby across the second half of last year's regular season and throughout this year's regular season. And we know how good of a defender OG Anunoby is. He's a top 5 perimeter defender in the NBA. He's averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal and a half and block a night for the Knicks this year, and is shooting 35% from 3. He's still 27 years old. They did have to give him almost max money in the 2024 offseason, which definitely could be a little bit risky long-term, knowing OG's injury history. As for Toronto, I do think they did a great job in this deal as well. Like I said, a win-win deal, so I'm going to give them an A. I think they hit on their second round pick in Jonathan Mogbo as a good high-energy role player, and then getting RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley for somebody that could have left you at the end of the year. I think they did better in the OG trade than they did in the Pascal Siakam deal, as RJ Barrett has been very productive since getting traded to the Toronto Raptors. Last year, he was great, 55% from the field, 39% from 3, and averaging 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists across 32 games. This year, the efficiency is down a little bit because the volume is up. With all of Toronto's injuries, RJ has been one of the more healthier Raptors this year and is one of their only guys that can really create a shot on the offensive end of the floor. As for Emmanuel Quickley, he did have a very good second half for the Raptors last year as a playmaker, but he has been banged up a ton this year, only appearing in 9 games in the 2025 season. Has been more inefficient than you would like, but I do think Quickley is going to be fine in the long term. Still just 25 years old, but they did have to pay him a decent amount in the 2024 offseason. So yeah, that is it for me. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you want to give me a grade on a trade that I didn't talk about, like Dennis Schroeder to Brooklyn, or like Simone Fontecchio to Detroit, please let me know down below. Drop a thumbs up if you guys did enjoy, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.